I didn't see any reason to waste your time watching me airbrush primer, but so what I did was just took my surface primer, white 73.600 Vallejo, and my primer, once again, 73.602 black Vallejo, and undercoat, underside got a black coat, top part got that white, and now yeah, that's universal to all the cars. Use the airbrush, nothing exciting, and so now we're gonna go ahead and get the top gray coat on. Okay, so near as I could tell from the model setup here and the photographs I found online, these cars, they took some abuse, and they definitely looked like they were pretty well worn. So this deck tan Vallejo 70.989 is very close to the Conrail Maintenance of Way Gray, so that's what it looks like. And then I'm going in to add some finer rust detail now. So for that, I'm starting off with a mahogany, and that is 71.036. So I've got it in my airbrush, and just based on what I'm seeing, these cars were pretty well abused, and that makes sense. I mean, considering what they were used for, you know, they just everything seemed to be rusted and scraped up, and just really worked, you know, rough. So we're gonna do the same thing here, and this mahogany is just gonna be my first color that I'm gonna use to get that across. So nothing fancy in the weathering technique here. I'm not hitting necessarily anything specific. I just want to get some rust on areas where I think the rail would be bouncing around. So like through all these carriages, or where things would go through the eyelets here. Just trying to get a general flavor for what the car probably is going to look like. The photos of this thing that I found online were okay. They weren't great. And I'm using the Conrail Historic Society. So to give me an idea of how the rust looked, not necessarily model it, you know, piece by piece. So you can bear with me here as I make some adjustments to how I, you know, actually want it. But I think that's going to give us the general idea of, you know, where the rust is and what it looks like. Once again, you don't have to necessarily use an airbrush for this. You could do it by hand if you wanted. I just find that, you know, I get a little better control with the airbrush and get a nice coating of paint that's gonna match. So, okay, let's go with some darker colors here. So I'm gonna mix it up and show you what I'm using. Okay, so my next color is Burnt Umber. This is a great rust color. And just want to get it started here. It's a little bit darker than the one we used previously, and I thinned it out a lot more than the previous color, because I want to kind of get a little bit of a sort of a sloppy effect with it. But this is going to be the last color that we're going to use from the airbrush before we go into a little more detailing sort of work. So if you can see what I'm kind of getting at there, that is the look that I'm going for, sort of a sloppy kind of brown, and that matches the photographs that I saw. And I'm just trying to darken up that mahogany color a little bit, as the rust on this model, or this particular train was pretty dark. And I'm going with a much thinner color because I want to sort of tint the car, so I'm going over a lot more of the car with a wider, sort of a wider angle here to really get that darker color on this model. And I want to get this a little more even. Okay, so that's kind of sort of the look we're going for here on the model. I'm pretty happy with how that looks in comparison to what the real life model looked like. And so I think now it's time to turn over and get into a little bit of hand painting. Okay, so my next step here is to do some heavier weathering, and for that we are going to the tried and true method of oils. And I am going to be using some raw umber, and I am going to be using some burnt sienna, and I'm going to have these thinned down pretty good here. And what I want to do is I've sort of made almost like a wash out of them, and I'm just going to hit some areas that I saw in the photographs that seemed heavily rusted. So some of the photographs were from like 82, some of them for 87. The 82 photographs looked a lot cleaner than the 87 photographs. And so once again, I'm just going in here and thinking of areas that probably got dinged pretty good, you know, through the process. And I'm gonna want to model some chipped paint and stuff like that for those areas. But for now, I just want to get kind of some heavy grime on this thing. You know, where I imagine that there would be heavy grime, and that is basically around, you know, all the working parts. So I'm just sort of covering like the areas where I know like the rail would be sliding through, and that would be, you know, smacking around, taking the paint off, and that would lead to rust. So I'm just trying to hit the ends of the decks, places people would be walking, all that sort of stuff. And then the next step that I'm going to take with it is I'm going to come in here with a little bit of thinner and just sort of push the heavier areas around a little bit. And you'll notice that some of the paint from down below that was in the you know, the airbrush phase is starting to show through a little bit better, and that's kind of what I want. So I'm just sort of washing this grime down a little bit, letting it do its natural thing, kind of flow where it wants to flow, and that's going to give us a nice natural appearance to this. And so right now I'm just hitting it with thinner to thin out the paint that's on the model. And while I've got that thinner kind of sitting heavy, I come in with a little bit of that burnt sienna, and I'm going to add it to the fray here, and kind of push it around, but let the thinner sort of let it find its way around. And I'm going for, like I said, these cars were pretty heavily rusted and damaged. So like that is an appropriate level of rust based on what I saw on the prototype. So I kind of want that to come through on the model. And in areas where I've gone a little too heavy, I'm just going to repeat that wash process a little bit to try to get it to blend out. And then I can come in here too with a paper towel, sort of streak it a little bit in the direction I want it to go. And then always tease it back to get it the way I want it. Okay, so you'll end up getting a appearance that looks something like that. And when you take it a bit hard, and I know you kind of see this in the background here, you get a very worn look on your model, and that is exactly what I wanted for this. So we're going to do that to all of these cars. We're going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back and clean it up a little bit. Okay, so the next step in my detailing here is going to be a step that I think a lot of people skip, and that is, especially in N scale, and that is painting the wheels. So I've got a very thin tip brush here, and I'm holding the axle with a pair of tweezers, and I'm just taking that point around the outside of the wheel. I'm very careful not to get it in two places, one on the tread and two on the actual point that goes into the truck. Otherwise, you will impact how the wheel set operates. So I am using Italian dark brown as my color. It is a Model Master color, and it is an enamel paint, so it sticks to the the smooth plastic of the wheel a little bit better. And I did that because as I looked at my models, which were all heavily weathered, and you'll see those in a second here, I realized how out of place the wheels looked because they were just this dark, shiny black underneath the model, and it didn't look right. So I'm going to darken these up here just a little bit to make them match the rest of the model. Okay, so if we take a pause here and take a look, this is kind of sort of where we're getting to with our 3D prints. So cars are very heavily rusted, just like they are in the prototype. You'll notice on the wheels that I've got some silver showing, and I added that in the last step. I forgot to show you. That is just a Vallejo paints. It's just a silver color. So, and I wanted to, kind of distinguish that, give those wheels some detail. But as you can see, those oil washes are really bringing out the details there, right? They're really showing a working vehicle. And so the last thing I want to do, it's kind of a final step sort of thing, with a very diluted sort of a dirt color. I'm going to bring all of the detail that we've done here together in one final swoop here. So I'm going to load up my airbrush here, and I'll show you that dusty color here in just a second. Okay, so I took a heavily diluted light gray, worked out to about 1 drop of paint to about 6 drops of thinner, and I just sort of coated everything, and the goal there was to bring all of the colors, sort of mute them, put some of that road dust on there, and bring them all back together. So I'm going to get ready here for the final steps, which are some more detailed rust spots in certain areas. But by and large, we're done with the airbrush. We're done with the big paints. We're going to go on to some of the finer detail points, which I'll show you right now. Okay, so now we've got our basic weathering done, and I think it's time to pull it back just a little tiny bit. And what I mean by that is we've got some pretty derelict looking cars here, but you can see that I've gone back and I've added some deck tan, and if you recall, that is Vallejo number 70.986. And so what my technique was here is I put the paint in an area where I expected there to still be some paint left on the car, and using the brush just sort of made a puddle of it, and then very carefully worked that puddle around to reapply the paint in the areas that I don't want fully rusted out. And what I'm going for here is to create a faded chipped paint effect so that the paint coating is light. I don't have to worry about it being thick and clumpy. And I'm also, just by virtue of the fact that there's colors underneath, they're going to start coming through. And so it's almost kind of like a dry brush in places, that I'm using the paint on here to sort of give me a chipped and worn effect. And what that's going to do is it's going to just dial back some of this super hardcore weathering that we put on here. I don't want to cover most of it because these cars were pretty well loved, and I want that pretty well loved look to show up. I'm making sure that I fade out all of the edges. I don't want any sharp edges on here because that's not how paint chips and not how paint wears. So I want to make sure that I've got just enough of that paint on here to give that effect. And like areas here in between the lifts and the pullers, there's not going to be a whole lot of wear in there because, well, that's not where the rail's bouncing around. So we're going to go ahead and restore some of that paint in here. Once again, when you get towards the end, we want to sort of spread that paint out and fade it into the rust and the abused areas that we modeled. Okay, so when we get there, that's what we have left. That's what it looks like. You can see where the paint's been scraped off the deck and it's starting to rust, and you can see where it's in good shape. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these models, and that's going to wrap it up for the weathering and painting of these 3D printed models. Next time you see it, they're going to be on the layout.